You have 5 minutes to sign over your hotel chain, or I make the call to have you sent to prison for fraud, Emily. My mother leaned forward, eyes narrow and unyielding, her threat hanging in the air like smoke. Frame me, lock me behind bars, and take my $650 million empire for herself. She was certain the fear of prison bars would force me to kneel, the same certainty she had when she boycotted my wedding 4 years earlier to punish me for choosing Scott. She never learned that threats only sharpen the blade you're handed. I let her finish her wine, the last swallow she'd take without consequence, and set my fork down with a clink that echoed louder than her words. No, Mom. I'm not signing a damn thing. I'm here to collect what's owed. I reached under my chair, seized the thick legal binder I'd kept concealed, and slammed it onto the table with enough force to make the glasses jump and the silverware rattle. Those pages weren't a negotiation. They were her reckoning. 3 hours earlier, I stood in my Hollywood Hills office staring at the news ticker racing across the screen, Emily Resorts Group valued at $650 million. At 29, I'd transformed her rejection into an empire built on sweat and steel. My phone buzzed on the desk. Not congratulations, just her text, family dinner, 7 p.m. urgent, don't be late. No pride in what I'd achieved, no regret for the years she spent trying to sabotage me, just a command, the same cold tone she'd used to dismiss Scott as worthless on the day she chose absence over celebration. My stomach twisted for a heartbeat, the old reflex of dread, then steadied into something colder and clearer. This time the twist became resolve. She thought she was calling a daughter to bully into submission. She had no clue she was inviting the person who now held the evidence to put her away. Stories like this remind me how betrayal can either destroy you or forge something unbreakable. If you've ever stared down that kind of family power play, you know the fire it lights inside. But tonight wasn't about forgiveness. It was about justice finally arriving at the table. 4 years earlier at the wedding hall in Los Angeles, I stood under the chandeliers in my dress scanning the entrance while guests whispered, and the string quartet filled the silence. Linda never appeared. My phone vibrated with her text, "You made your choice. I'm not coming." She couldn't accept Scott the engineer from a modest family she viewed as beneath our status, so she boycotted the day that should have been ours. She didn't stop at absence. Within hours, she severed my trust fund access, canceled my health insurance, and began calling every engineering firm her network reached. If they hired Scott, she'd threaten to pull every loan, every line of credit her influence controlled. She aimed to make us desperate enough to return begging for her forgiveness. Brian, my older brother, texted Scott almost immediately after the ceremony, "Good luck finding work," like a casual warning shot. Dad sat through the reception, staring at his plate, offering only silence. The moment her text landed, the truth hit hard. This wasn't disapproval, it was calculated war. Scott and I left the hall hand in hand, no rice thrown, no family photos, no blessings. Just the two of us driving away from a celebration that never fully materialized. We arrived at a cramped studio apartment in East LA, the building sagging, the hallway reeking of old paint and damp concrete. Rent was low because the place was barely holding together. We hauled our few boxes inside, set up a mattress on the floor, and began surviving. Scott sent resumes daily, only to receive polite rejections or sudden cancellations, last-minute calls claiming the position was filled. I knew Linda's calls were working like poison through the industry, her threats closing doors before they opened. We ate instant noodles from the corner store, took cash jobs, whatever paid that week, and poured every spare hour into renovating our first small resort. We scraped walls, laid tile, ran wiring, until our palms blistered and our backs ached. One night after Scott came home with yet another rejection letter, I sat on that mattress staring at the cracked ceiling, tears burning my eyes. I wiped them away, grabbed the hammer, and kept hammering because stopping would mean she won. Every nail driven felt like defiance. Every wall patched felt like reclaiming ground she tried to steal. We finished that first property, turned it profitable, then scaled one deal, one loan, one sleepless night at a time. Looking back, I wonder how many of us have had that one family member who thought they knew better than we did about our own life. We moved to East LA with nothing but we had each other. And that turned out to be enough. After those first brutal months in East LA, the struggle hardened into routine. We lived on the cheapest fast food from drive-thru's burgers, wrapped in greasy paper fries gone cold by the time we got home. Scott left before dawn for interviews that vanished before he arrived, another firm suddenly not hiring another position filled overnight. Linda's calls were still working, her network closing doors faster than he could knock. I knew because the rejections came too clean, too consistent. We survived on less scraping cash from day labor, painting houses, hauling trash, cleaning offices, anything that paid same day. Nights stretched long in the studio, the single bulb flickering over the mattress on the floor. We skipped meals so often hunger became background noise, a dull ache we ignored. But the resort never stopped. Every free hour we drove to the site, tools rattling in the trunk, hands already raw. We tore out moldy drywall, replaced shattered windows, installed basic plumbing until the place started to look like something livable. I learned to mud joints, sand edges, until dust coated my lungs. Scott wired circuits, ran conduit, made sure every switch worked. One evening, after Scott received another rejection email, he sat on the floor, phone in hand, staring at the screen. I watched from the doorway, seeing the defeat settle in his shoulders, the way they curved forward like he was carrying more than just disappointment. I crossed the room, knelt beside him, and let the tears come hot and silent down my cheeks. He didn't speak, just wrapped his arms around me until the shaking stopped. When it did, I stood up, wiped my face with my sleeve, and picked up the hammer from the toolbox. Every nail we hammered felt like pushing back against her voice in my head, telling us we'd never make it without her money or her approval. We kept going. Linda kept watching too. She pulled our credit reports regularly, tracking the score as it dropped, the late payments stacking up, the debt creeping higher. She saw our hardship as validation, that her tough love was working, that eventually I'd break and come home. I saw it as evidence we were tougher than she ever gave us credit for. We finished that first resort, the small 12-room property, with a rooftop deck overlooking the city. Guests booked, the reviews rolled in positive, the revenue started flowing steady and real. One check, one 5-star rating, one repeat customer at a time, the numbers climbed. We reinvested everything, bought the next property, then the next. The hunger faded, but the drive never did. It turned into momentum. I still think about those nights, the kind where you question if you're strong enough. Maybe you've had nights like that too. Then the news broke, and everything changed overnight. Back in the present, after that urgent text from Linda, my phone buzzed again, this time with a secure encrypted message from Tiffany. My younger sister had taken a huge risk, snapping a photo of a crumpled loan notice she'd fished from Mom's desk trash can. $32 million in high-risk bridge loans, personally guaranteed by Linda, due in full within days, from a private equity firm that preyed on desperate wealthy borrowers. The figures leaped off the screen, the default clause in bold red, the personal guarantee signature unmistakable. Linda wasn't reaching out for pride in my success or reconciliation. She was sinking fast, and my $650 million valuation on the news had made me the only visible lifeline. She thought she'd bully me into throwing her one. She had no idea I'd already positioned myself to pull the plug. I opened the app, zoomed in on the document, the numbers confirming what Tiffany's single-line message had hinted: be careful, she's desperate. I didn't reply. Instead, I dialed my advisor in Hollywood immediately. Premiums are high in CA markets, he warned, voice calm but urgent. The shell company is eager to offload before she defaults and tanks the note. Get it done, I said. I want that debt in my name before 5 p.m. He moved fast. The transaction closed electronically within hours. Pennies on the dollar because they sensed collapse coming. By late afternoon, the transfer documents hit my inbox, stamped, sealed, and ironclad. I stepped into the chrome elevator of my Hollywood Hills office building, checked my reflection in the polished doors. The woman staring back had sharp edges, no trace left of the scared girl who'd once begged for Linda's approval after being cut off. Tonight, I wasn't driving to Beverly Hills as a daughter hoping for acceptance. I was arriving as a creditor, holding the keys to her downfall. Sometimes the person who tried to break you ends up handing you the tools to rebuild stronger. Funny how life works, right? Driving up the winding canyon roads to Beverly Hills that evening, the city lights glittering below like scattered diamonds, I realized this dinner was never about family reunion. It was about settling a debt she never saw coming. I stepped into the dining room of the Beverly Hills estate, the chandelier scattering harsh light across the long mahogany table where the family sat rigid like actors frozen mid-scene in a play gone wrong. Gary remained at one end, twisting his napkin into tight spirals, Knuckles' white eyes fixed downward, refusing to acknowledge my presence. Tiffany sat opposite, staring at the floral china pattern with such intensity it seemed she hoped the design would swallow her whole. Brian flicked his gaze repeatedly to the grandfather clock against the wall, counting seconds as if time itself was slipping from Linda's grasp. Linda poured vintage Bordeaux. She could no longer truly afford the bottle, quivering slightly in her grip, the wine splashing a single drop onto the linen she pretended not to notice. She set the bottle down with a deliberate thud, the crystal ringing against the wood like a warning. She cut into her steak with sharp, violent strokes, then lifted her eyes to mine. "I saw the news," she said, tone laced with contempt. "Beginner's luck. It makes amateur girls think they're businesswomen. And how's the engineer still doodling blueprints while you play at running things?" She hurled the word engineer like an insult, refusing to grant Scott the dignity of being called my husband, or recognizing the empire we'd forged from nothing. 4 years ago, those same words would have collapsed me into my chair, made me stammer excuses, beg for her approval. Tonight I simply observed the sweat glistening on her upper lip, despite the room's chill. The involuntary twitch of her eyes toward the clock, calculating how much longer she could sustain the facade of dominance. She reached into her jacket pocket, slid a thick manila envelope across the polished surface, stopping inches from my plate. Inside, draft petition for conservatorship, psychiatric evaluations, signed by Dr. Warren Ellis. A doctor she controlled through his failed investment debts, all fabricated, all prepared to file with the court. Sign voluntarily, or Ellis files tomorrow. Your stock crashes, investors flee. I step in to save the family legacy. It's your choice, sweetheart. Her smile was thin and cruel, the same expression she'd worn when she boycotted my wedding, convinced her authority was unbreakable. Sitting there watching her pour that expensive wine like nothing had changed, it made me wonder how many families hide control behind love like that. She thought the game was over. She had no idea I was holding the winning hand. The room went quiet after Linda's threat, the envelope sitting between us like a loaded gun. She leaned back, confident the fake evaluations from Dr. Warren Ellis would force my hand, her smile thin and satisfied, as if the conservatorship papers were already signed. "You're imagining things, dear," she said, voice smooth now, trying to gaslight me into doubting my own memory. "I was helping you grow up, teaching you that you couldn't survive without me." I just watched her, the tremor in her hand, when she reached for her wine glass, the way her eyes flicked to Brian for backup. Then she chuckled low and wet, like she was remembering a fond joke. "Hate him, I don't hate Scott. I don't think about him at all. He was just collateral. I made a few calls to the top firms in LA, told them if they hired your husband, I'd pull every loan we held with them. LA is small when money talks. I heard you two were living in a basement eating ramen, wearing secondhand coats. I admit I checked your credit reports occasionally just to see how close you were to breaking. I wasn't being cruel, sweetheart. I was being a mother. I had to let you hit rock bottom so you'd remember who holds the ladder." The confession landed heavy, every word confirming the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, the rejections Scott faced, the meals we skipped, all orchestrated from this table. The last shred of guilt I felt for what I was about to do evaporated. I reached out, slid the envelope back across the table. It hit her wineglass with a sharp tink. "You love leverage, Mom. So let's talk about yours." Her smile faltered for the first time. "What are you doing?" she snapped, voice cracking. "You sign or Ellis files in the morning. Ellis can file whatever he wants. It won't matter because you're not negotiating with your daughter anymore." I opened the binder, turned it so she could read the cover page transfer document stamped by the Commonwealth of California. You took out $32 million in bridge loans 6 months ago from a shell company called Apex Capital High Interest, short-term backed by your personal guarantee and secured by 51% of your voting shares in the family holding company. Linda's face went gray, the color draining so fast it looked like someone pulled a plug. That's confidential. How do you know that Apex Capital was looking to offload their bad debt last week? They thought you were going to default, so they sold the note cheap. I bought it, Mom. I own the shell company. I own the debt, and I own the default clause. She stared at the pages, mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land, the realization hitting in slow, terrifying waves. I called the loan, I said. Full repayment, $32 million due immediately. Hearing her say it out loud that she had to make us suffer to teach me a lesson, I couldn't help but think what kind of lesson is worth destroying your own child's future. The room went quiet. Then Brian made his move. The room went quiet after Linda's confession, the confession still hanging in the air like smoke from a dying fire. She stared at the binder, her face gray the color of ash, as the realization sank in that I owned her debt, owned her default clause, owned the leverage she'd always wielded against everyone else. I called the loan. I repeated, voice flat and final. Full repayment, $32 million due immediately. Her mouth worked silently for a moment. Then she lunged forward, hands clawing at the binder pages, crumpling them in her fists. This is fraud, she bellowed, spit flying. You can't do this, I'll tear it up, I'll sue, I'll ruin you. Brian shot up from his chair, eyes wild, chair screeching backward. You can't do this, he shouted, lunging across the table toward the binder. I got my promotion because of her loans, because of the deals she steered my way. You think you can just take it all? His fingers brushed the edge of the pages, ready to rip. Tiffany sprang up faster than I'd ever seen her move, shoving Brian hard enough to knock him off balance. The crystal decanter on the sideboard toppled, crashing to the parquet in a glittering explosion of shards and red wine. Sit down, Brian, she snapped, voice steady for the first time that night. Emily's got this. Brian stumbled back into the sideboard. Stunned Tiffany, standing between him and the binder like a shield. I didn't flinch, didn't move. Just picked up my phone, thumb hovering over the pre-drafted message to my lead counsel. One word, execute. I hit send. Go ahead, tear it, burn it, eat it if you want, I said, voice slicing through his panting. That binder is a courtesy copy. My legal team just filed the confession of judgment electronically with the Los Angeles County Clerk. It's on the docket now, public record. The debt is called as default is registered. The clock already ran out. Linda let the pages drop with a heavy thud, her hands shaking. You can't. I have assets. I have the house. The house takes time to foreclose, I corrected. I didn't want the house. I wanted speed. I reviewed the collateral agreement you signed with Apex Capital to get that bridge loan. You pledged your controlling stake in the family holding company as security. Under UCC Article 9, a secured creditor can seize voting rights immediately upon default to protect the asset. I stepped around the table until I stood directly in front of her, the smell of sour wine and fear rolling off her. I'm the creditor. I just exercised that right. I own your shares, Linda. I control the board. I control the building. I control you. Her phone started buzzing in her pocket, then mine, then Tiffany's, an ugly chorus of alerts announcing the end. That's probably the board secretary, I said calmly. They've been notified of the change in control. Congratulations on your retirement, Mom. You've just been fired from your own company. Linda sagged into her chair, air rushing out of her like a punctured tire. Gary stared at me, eyes wide with something between terror and awe, saying nothing, the silence louder than any protest. I picked up my purse, turned, and walked out, heels clicking steady and unbothered across the parquet past portraits of ancestors who would have despised me through the foyer and out the heavy oak front door. The night air hit my face, cold, sharp, clean. Walking out those doors, I felt lighter than I had in years. Sometimes the hardest part isn't winning, it's realizing who was never really on your side. And the real consequences. They were only just beginning. 4 months later, I stood in the corner office of my Hollywood Hills headquarters, the name on the door now reading Emily Resorts, CEO. The sleek logo of our expanded chain, glowing against the glass wall overlooking the city that once felt so far out of reach. The building that used to house Linda's holding company had been completely rebranded. The views sharper, cleaner, the space filled with the quiet energy of people building something real. I hosted workshops there twice a month for young hustlers and LA entrepreneurs, grinding the same way Scott and I had back in East LA, sharing the raw truth about turning rejection into revenue, about scaling without permission from anyone who ever tried to gatekeep your future. The room always filled with notebooks, laptops, and that same determined silence, the kind that comes from knowing the only approval you need is your own. Linda's estate in Beverly Hills went into foreclosure exactly 3 months after the default, the non-judicial process in California moving swiftly once the lender initiated the trustee sale. She lost the house, the furnishings, the legacy she'd guarded like a fortress. Everything sold at auction to cover the unpaid loans, the public records listing the property as abandoned after she vacated. Brian's career collapsed in the fallout. The board's investigation uncovered how he'd benefited directly from Linda's steered deals. The promotion, the bonuses, the quiet favors, all tied to the bridge loans she'd used as leverage. He was unemployed now, blacklisted across LA's interconnected business circles, no firm willing to risk the association after the filings made the connections impossible to hide. I hadn't spoken to any of them since that night. No calls, no messages, no lingering obligation to explain or justify. The silence between us was deliberate and final. You can't choose your family, but you can choose your peace. These days I focus on the people who lift me up, not the ones who tried to hold me down. If you've built something better after walking away from toxicity, you get it, and I'd love to hear how you did it. Toxic control isolates it, pushes away the very relationships it claims to protect, until all that's left are echoes in empty rooms, and regret that comes too late. Independence builds real family, the kind forged in mutual respect, shared struggle, and the freedom to walk away when respect vanishes. Scott walked in rolling blueprints across my desk, glanced up and grinned, ready to build something new. I smiled back. Always. The city lights blinked on below like fireflies welcoming the next chapter. One we'd write together without ever looking back at the ruins we left behind. Thank you all for taking the time to watch the video. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to leave a comment, sharing your thoughts and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any upcoming videos.